Hey, so I'm delighted to say that we've got two former Olympians with us in studio this morning. They were speaking today at the announcement of the Irish Life Health as an official partner to Athletics Ireland. Irish Life Health are backing athletics as a sport that delivers on health, wellness and lifelong activity. Gary Ryan and Dr. Tom Comyns, you're very welcome. How are things?
Thanks, Owen. Good.
So the first thing I wanted to chat to you about is the idea of athletics coaching. You've obviously both got athletics backgrounds, but I didn't want to chat about coaching within athletics. I actually wanted to chat about coaching in other sports, because your background is obviously athletics, and from hurling to rugby, you both specialise in different things. So, Gary, I guess just to start with yourself, you were with the Tipperary hurlers since 2014, I understand, up until last year.
Yeah.
What was the appeal of you to the Tipperary hurlers at the time?
Good question. I suppose I'd worked with different hurling teams before that, different individuals in hurling. Like I was in NUIG and worked with a lot of Clare hurlers, some of the Galway guys. And Eamon O'Shea was a professor in NUIG at the time, and his son was an international squash player, and I'd worked with Conor actually for a little bit. And Eamon asked me to get involved, and it was, I'm a Tipperary man. I was really delighted to get the opportunity. You brought up in Tipperary, this is the holy grail to be involved with the Tipp senior hurlers. So I jumped at the opportunity, and from 2014 until this year I was involved and really enjoyed it. And I suppose for me as an athletics coach, and having worked with track and field athletes up to that point and been exposed to a few other sports, I found it a nice challenge. I wanted to do something different, and that was, from my point of view, it was something that I felt I could learn a lot doing, and at the same time I felt I had something I could bring to that group. And I'd like to think that's the way it turned out. We were able to work together to do reasonably well, winning an All-Ireland, being to All-Ireland and another All-Ireland final and in semi-finals twice. So it was that idea of trying to test myself and test the people that I could get to work with.
Yeah, I don't think it's any coincidence that you've both ended up working in different fields and you both come from the same field. And Tom, I'm not sure, is it specifically the fact that you come from athletics that makes you such an attractive proposition to ball-playing sports, or is it the fact that you're just something different and something that hasn't been tapped into, say, historically in, say, GAA and in rugby?
Yeah, no, I think it was because it came from athletics. We were brought, I suppose, when I came into athletics, into rugby, specifically came in for the purpose of a speed coach. So my first year contract was to be speed coach with the Munster team and also to feed into the national team. And it was purely because I had that background, and I suppose we had the ability to work on the players' technique, improve their speed-specific skill, and so that they would be, I suppose, more explosive on the pitch, quicker on the pitch, more reactive on the pitch. And the rugby coaches and the rugby fraternity, I suppose, saw that as something they hadn't had before, and then that could bring positives to the team.
Was there a big focus on the style in which the way Munster players were running at the time? Were they running wrong, essentially, for a certain point until you came in?
I would say that, we're not looking for them to be 100-metre Olympic sprinters, but the key thing is the acceleration, that first 10, 15, 20 metres. And they had to improve in that area. So, for example, most of them would, in 2 yards, be standing upright. Instead of them being low and driving all the time and keeping this low angle position you'd see like the Usain Bolt's doing. So it was key aspects like that needed to be improved upon, definitely. And that was the big focus of my initial period with them, was to bring their skill level with speed technique back up to the level it probably should be. And once that was ingrained a little bit more, then we could work on more advanced types of speed training then as well.
It's interesting because we spoke about this at a roadshow a couple of years ago, actually. It was down in Cork. Derval O'Rourke was one of the people at the roadshow, and we can actually play this clip. She was speaking to Joe and Ger at the time. Have a listen to this.
I think there's a lot to be said for correct sprint mechanics and running mechanics, and that being taught when kids are quite young. I was lucky, I did some gymnastics as a child, and then I did a lot of running, but I was in a really great club which taught me really well. And I just think specialising, you have these kids who are just playing rugby when they're really young, and I just think, why are they not on a track learning to run correctly? And I just think there's a lot to be said for that, but I don't know, is that a simplistic view?
Well, maybe not. When you watch a soccer game professional, when you watch Peter O'Mahony play rugby, do you think he's not running properly? Not Peter, not Peter specifically. But professional rugby players, soccer players, are their sprint mechanics good?
Well, recently, Simon Zebo would have been in my club when I was a kid. Right. He was a lot younger than me. And when I see him run on a rugby pitch, I always think you can tell that he's a runner.
Right.
And so I do it the opposite way. I pick out the people who I think have a running background. Really basic stuff, just lifting your knees, like lift your bloody knees. You know, I see people hitting a wing and I'm like, yeah, lift your knees, like I'm shouting at the TV.
They don't bend their knees high enough.
They just don't lift them high enough. There's not enough drive through the ground. But, you know, I don't play rugby. Like, no one tackles me in my sports. I have a lot of respect for what they do. So...
Is that something you identify with, Gary? That's you watch a field sport like that and you say, it's just not quite right, that technique.
Yeah, and I think, I suppose, if you think about it, a lot of players in sports have probably been playing that sport since they were 5, 6, 7. They may not have been exposed to a range of things. So when I kind of met them at 21, 22, they've had 18 years or 19 years of maybe poor technique, and it's been kind of reinforced, and then you're trying to undo that. So I think those that get a grounding in something like athletics at an early age, I didn't need to ask the player if they'd been in an athletics club, you know, at 6 or 7 or 10. It almost was kind of self-apparent. And, you know, I think speed is so important now, and it's kind of so valued in pretty much every sport. You look at the NFL draft and what's happening there. You look at scouting stats and you know, soccer's become so data-driven around how they're scouting now, and speed has become so important from such an early age. And if you have good technique, you can get quicker, and it's really a valuable commodity. So yeah, I suppose, kind of geeky, you'd kind of look at people running in any sport and kind of go, oh, if I had him, you know, we talk about knee lift or leg drive or whatever, body position as Tommy was talking about, and how they could improve. You know, particularly when you're talking about short distances, you know, in hurling, the average sprint is 14 metres. So how much can you lose or gain in 14 metres? A significant amount, because all you need to win is every contest by a metre. And it makes a huge difference. So if you can get good technique, it makes a big difference.
Is there a team sport in particular that has kind of a record of being better when it comes to the technique? You say you watch a lot of sports.
When you think about, you know, we learn so much from the States and kind of almost where they are in lots of things, and you think about, not necessarily that they've done this within American football, but you see how many more track and field athletes are now finding their way through the NFL draft into professional contracts in the NFL. I think you see rugby is probably, and a lot of the professional sports have certainly taken on board this idea of athletic development and are now employing specialists that have a background in track and field. And so that they are getting, at an earlier age in the academies, some grounding in decent technique. But as I said, it probably is important to get that from 8, 9, 10 as well, and having that exposure to athletics, I think, is a great sport for it.
I was just about to say, like, I'm not sure in the Munster Academy if you're aware at the moment of more of a focus, say, since your tenure, that there might be on the actual technique of running.
Yes, they would do it, and I know that they would have focus on those particular speed sessions. It always is an issue with speed and trying to fit it in. You know, you've heavy schedules even at the academy with all the games they have to play. So having that opportunity where you have dedicated time on speed is quite limited, and that's probably something that. When I was in rugby, we actually had a focus on that, and it was one session a week, and it was more sessions for the players who it was essential for, like your Keith Earls and so on. But it is something that I think coaches and S&C coaches in rugby and field sports need to be mindful of. You know, doing speed, doing it at the right time. You know, some people traditionally you'll have it doing it at the end of a session instead of at the start when they're fresh, and looking at what is the individual needs and where is it going to make a big difference to certain players and target that. And I think that is the essential thing. Otherwise, we're not covering that basis, and you're not really going to tap into quality that will be distinctive for them and actually set them apart.
Yeah, I'd imagine the idea that coming from the background that you guys have in terms of being sprinters, that it must have been fairly annoying hearing the idea that as a nation, we're a slow nation, we don't have sprinters, because clearly from what you're talking about there, this is something that you can take and actually make better on a vast scale.
Yeah, I suppose we were, you know, probably that first generation. There were sprinters before us who'd done reasonably well, but probably the first generation that competed at European Championships, Worlds, Olympics on a regular basis. And it was, you know, I'd often got that, you know, in the beginning, and you probably got it as well, as you're Irish and that's it, you can't sprint, you can do cross country. But we were the first generation, and the others have taken it on from there. And it just needed to change the mindset of, look, we can do this. Now we didn't have maybe the facilities and the coaching around at the time as widespread. And that's certainly improved, and that certainly helped, I think, this generation. But the first thing you got to do is, go, yes, I can do this. And look, I am who I am. I'm, physically probably a couple of inches short and, started late that I could have maybe won Olympic medals. But at least I got more out of myself than maybe was expected, I suppose. So we can be that. We can be anything we want to be honest with you, if we plan it and work at it hard enough from an early age right through the system.
And the early age is so vital as well, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a very rote way of learning either, because like you look every Sunday morning, the park runs all around the country and all the young people that are taking part in that. I wonder if there's sort of a less instructive way to actually perhaps use those park runs as an avenue to teach people the correct way of running, that of course you can go and enjoy yourself, but maybe to have somebody like yourselves there, or anybody who's competed at a high level, to actually say, if you lift your knees a little bit higher, you'll actually run a little bit quicker, and while still enjoying those park runs, you might actually have a generation of athletes who might be that bit quicker.
Well, even in that, there's 350 or plus athletics clubs around the country with people who've actually gone through coaching courses and understand this, and that's right on our doorstep, and maybe we don't access that expertise enough, and maybe that maybe people could just do that, is actually, right, I'll go and I'll get some coaching here, and it doesn't have, it's whatever age you are, it could be the park run people as well, but going into athletic clubs and trying to learn a little bit more, which will make their whole experience a bit better. But I mean, Tom will talk to you about the fundamental movements and how important they are at an early age and how specific they are in teaching, I guess. But I think we could all get better, whatever time we are, if we actually went and got a little bit of help from someone who knows a little bit more.
Yeah, it seems to me that when it comes to early specialisation and things like that, say, for example, it's very obvious that a great rugby player could be benefited by running well, or could benefit from athletics training. Can it work the other way when it comes to cross-pollination, that somebody who's a sprinter can benefit from playing a ball sport, for example? I'm sure they can, but it's less of kind of a motor skills based thing. It's more to do with the idea of actually training your mind to think about situations in a different way. Am I correct in assuming that?
Yeah, you are. Like they are distinctly different. Athletics probably feed in more to those team sports, but regardless of that, like any child or any youth should be sampling all these different sports and having the opportunity just to be engaged. Because even if they play rugby and end up being a sprinter, they'll build up skills from rugby, endurance, resilience, goal setting, that they could apply to other sports. So it is a massive issue at the moment where kids are just doing one or two sports, or in certain areas where that's the only sport. For example, it might be GAA or rugby, or athletics is the only sport in that area.
And do we know if that's a growing trend, the specialisation of one sport, that you say there's more and more people just picking one from an early age and sticking with that? Is it, say, more than it was 10 years ago, or
I'd say probably similar. You might get your youths, your kids who are 5, 6, 7, 8 doing different sports, but if they're in a school, for example, and that school is very soccer focused or rugby focused, they probably tend towards that sport only, and then it's up to that sport. If that sport is not covering all fundamental motor skill basis, and some clubs are particularly good, especially at the youth level, of spending the first half an hour of a session just doing fundamental skills and not that sport, but they might be isolated pockets. But if they're doing athletics and bringing and developing those skills and still doing their rugby or their hockey or their Gaelic football or camogie, then they can transfer that over to it. But it does give the opportunity. The thing with any of these skills as well, it's not actually just running a drill. So if you run a drill and you're sprinting, that's fine. But unless you have a coach there who's able to pick out your faults and correct your faults, your skill level won't improve. It doesn't happen naturally. You need some coaching on these areas, and they need to be set up where you're given some feedback, you're given some direction to try to get you to what they call this mastery level of fundamental motor skill.
I read that the early specialisation can actually lead to an increased chance of injury within young people. Is that true?
Yeah, injury, dropout, and less sporting success as well.
Why is that? What's the idea behind the injuries section? Is that because of just more repetition doing the exact same things and not training your body in a different way, or do we know?
Well, anecdotally, I suppose I worked with athletes in a few different sports, and when they get to take running as a really good example, if you've been hurling, two of the things that are really, really developed are catching and striking. They're unbelievably good, but they haven't been taught from an early age, or they haven't been taught by someone who's an expert in the area about how to run. So they get running technique that's with bad habits and poor technique, and actually that exposes them to a higher risk of injury.
Okay.
So that would be kind of one example of it. So if you don't have the skill at an adequate level, then you are probably more likely to get injured.
Right, so it's just a lack of education really in their movement on the pitch.
Yeah.
It's the same with landing. You know, if you land incorrectly, you're more at risk of an ACL injury. And fundamental skills and athletics would teach you how to land in the right position. So you're offloading the knee joint essentially, so you're not putting yourself at risk of certain type of knee injuries. And if you don't have good landing mechanics, then you are. If you're landing from a height to catching a ball and can't land correctly, that poses an issue as well.
Do you think that there's any benefits for early specialisation? Is there a sport that would benefit quite well from early specialisation, or is it really across the board you shouldn't be specialising early?
Well, you have your swimming, for example, which is very much early and competing early. So that's possibly one sport, but potentially that poses issues as well for swimmers because they're not weight bearing, and that poses issues with regard to bone health. So you know. There is some positives obviously, but there also are some negatives, and it's what my advice would be: just sample different sports, and then when they're teenagers and so on, focus in on them. Another problem today is if you are in your teenage years and you're still sampling loads of sports, then you have potentially burnout. So it's managing both of those scenarios is the thing as well.
Do we know that within Athletics Ireland at the moment, with the very encouraging sprinting crop we have, particularly underage as we saw in 2018, are they differentiating between that and other sports as well at the moment, or is it very much a focus on just sprinting at the moment?
I think I come across athletes in lots of different sports. I suppose the opportunities have been greater in the last 10, 15 years to try different things. So typically anybody that I'd meet that's sort of 18, 19, 20, they would have been in other sports. I think also one of the things about early specialisation is almost mental fatigue to it and sport fatigue to it. So I think it's important that actually you do all of these things and then you start to specialise more. And I think that would be those that I've met and talked to that are likely to be successful as adults are ones who've done more sports as a younger age, because they haven't had 20 years of just the one sport, and it's probably something that's still exciting and fresh to them. And I think there's two sides to this. One about the early specialisation you talk about. I think one of the other factor, apart from performance, that we need to kind of be very conscious about is actually as a country and our whole involvement in physical activity and people being participants in sport. And that's why getting those skills early on, or even, you talked about parkrun and the equivalent in we talked about it this morning with Athletics Ireland and Irish Life sponsoring the Daily Mile. Getting kids active and more active more often means actually they demystify being physically active. And the more people that are physically active, that pool increases the amount of people that might actually come through at performance level as well. So I think that's critical for us, is actually to say, do try all of these things, do get a range of skills. We would like to think that athletics will be a core one to that. And it will benefit everything, not just who we see come out at the top in lots of different sports, but I think actually we'll start to see more people be more active for longer, which is it's important to see people on the podium at the Olympics or qualifying for World Cups and so on. But it also is incredibly important that for the health of our nation in the long term. Yeah,
I was just actually about to touch on that, because it is a couple of very important culture issues that you touch on there, and I'm sure you'll agree as well, this sort of divide between participation and national success. And in a recent sports plan, I remember Brendan Griffin and Shane Ross were talking about targeting a certain amount of medals at each Olympics. Is it possible for that to be a healthy national mindset when it's kind of governing the entire country that we have as a sporting body, or should we allow that to be the byproduct of a better culture and a culture of enjoyment and participation?
I think yes. I think there's probably two strands to it. You'll have that elite level which will produce the medals, but it should be built on trying to increase people being physically active and possibly running. And there is a base there. You've 300,000 people running in Ireland. The park run is huge, and that whole recreation participation in athletics is an area that could, without a doubt, grow. And the positive health benefits from that are immense. So, and then if you have that as your foundation, and then you will get people who from that actually they might be quite young and they realise, yeah, actually I'm good at this, and then progress up the ladder. So I think you have both of them married together in some ways, but two distinct elements of an organisation like Athletics Ireland.
I think, to be fair, if you look at the National Sports Policy, if you look at the Healthy Ireland Plan, if you look at the National Physical Activity Plan, they all really speak to this, and the vast majority of our spending on sport is still and quite deliberately focused on getting more people more active. And that's as it should be. Obviously, the things that we probably focus on more are those medals. And, from my point of view, I want to see more investment in our athletes and support them. But we have to get that balance right, because we do have to... It's strategic investment, so that actually we're spending less on health and on people on an ageing, that if we invest in physical activity, then we should see a benefit in that. It's actually quite economic, and it's strategic and well planned. And we can do this. We can do that in partnership and in harmony with building that kind of culture around excellence. Because actually, athletics clubs will survive. Any club will survive on having a critical mass that allows it to do things, to get better facilities, to get more people involved, to grow the volunteering base. So they are separate, but they actually coalesce quite well. And I think that's what we have to, the culture of sport. We talk a lot about Ireland being a sporting nation. We have to really make that happen in every way, in terms of our investment and in terms of what we do and getting up off our bums and actually being active.
Yeah, it sounds to me that it is just participation. It is just more people involved with their local athletic clubs. It is almost like every sporting body in the world, really. It is the groundswell of people at a foundation level, which can help make everything better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It doesn't seem that the whole idea of grand development plans and things like that are necessarily...
You need the grand development plan. You need a structure, you need an organisation to put the whole thing through. But it does come down to who's there on a Tuesday night and what in Kilkenny or Roscommon or wherever it might be, and it's the volunteering base that drives everything. We're doing some work with some organisations around volunteering and supporting it. And where do the Olympic champions come from? They come from, and they all start with a volunteer. But also so does the Fit for Light group, or the kids athletics, whatever it is. They all come from that volunteer base. So those things do work together. The investment might look separate, but at the core of this is a unified Irish system of sport.
I should ask you before we go, are you planning on getting a return to hurling at any point in the near future?
I suppose my answer to that is I felt it was time to take a break from hurling, from a hurler's point of view who needed a break from me, and from me to take a kind of a bird's eye view and see what I was doing. I've gone back to coaching athletics, actually, which has been really interesting, and kind of it reinvigorated me. I do miss it, I have to say. Only like we were talking before we started around the National League starting, and certainly you develop a relationship with athletes over time anyway, so missing the group and stuff like that. But I think who knows in the future, but right now I work with a couple of athletes. It's very exciting, it's very interesting to me, and looking to help them get to the Olympics, and it's a fairly full-on involvement when you're working with more one-on-one with some athletes. So I'm quite excited about that at the moment. So who knows what happens when I'm old and retired.
When it comes to focusing on the Olympics, you're obviously in a similar situation. Tom, you're working closely with Thomas Barr. It's obviously a ridiculously complicated question to ask at the end of an interview, how you actually manage the Olympic cycle from this point and from this juncture towards Tokyo. Is it a focus on how to maximise potential for August 2020 at this point, or is it still a very much process-driven, get through this year first?
No, it's not. It's focused always on a 4-year cycle and on the Olympics. So together, I look after Tom's strength and conditioning and working with his coaches and his physio, that we can work on a long-term plan on what are the qualities we need to improve on, where, for example, in strength and conditioning could he work on, and targeting them and building them in over that cycle. So you still, I suppose, bigger end goals that will help him hopefully to be successful in Tokyo, and then shorter term goals which will be broken into the year and into different sections of the year. So he's hoping to run some indoors, so our S&C will change then based on that indoor season, and we become more explosive. So it changes depending on the time of year, but your big goal is always targeted towards that Olympic Games.
Can you take any credit for how he managed to peak at just the right time last year?
Of course. Together with his coaches Drew and Haley. But it's true though, we work as a team and just making sure that he can get there in the best possible shape, and he's a great fellow to work with as well. Yeah, I'm sure he is. Listen, Tom and Gary, thank you so much for coming in today. Just a reminder, they were speaking today at the announcement of the Irish Life Health as an official partner to Athletics Ireland. Irish Life Health are backing athletics as a sport that delivers on health, wellness and lifelong activity.